New Orleans has always been a city with a character like no other. By day, its streets are alive with color, music, and the aroma of Creole cooking. By night, the city transforms into something even more atmospheric, with the soft glow of gas lamps lining the streets and the echo of jazz music spilling out of crowded clubs. But not all of the city's history is as charming as its culture. Some stories, like the tale of the Axeman, reveal a much darker side of New Orleans, a side where fear reigned supreme and a killer held the city hostage with his brutal crimes. The Axeman of New Orleans was no ordinary killer. His methods were gruesome, his motives unclear, and his identity shrouded in mystery. For over a year, between 1918 and 1919, he terrorized the city, targeting grocers and their families, leaving behind horrifying crime scenes and disappearing without a trace. To make matters worse, he claimed to be more than human, a demon who thrived on chaos. He even demanded jazz music to spare lives. This bizarre detail alone has helped cement his place as one of the most chilling figures in American true crime history. In the early 20th century, New Orleans was a city of contrasts, a vibrant port where cultures converged, creating a unique melting pot unlike anywhere else in the United States. The streets were alive with the rhythm of daily life. Market stalls overflowed with fresh produce and seafood from the Gulf, while street vendors called out to passers-by. At night, the city truly came alive. Jazz, a genre born in New Orleans, was reaching its golden age. Clubs, bars, and dance halls pulsed with the sounds of trumpets, saxophones, and syncopated rhythms. The city's soul was its music, a reflection of its diverse heritage. But beneath this lively, colorful exterior, there were undercurrents of struggle and tension. For many, particularly the city's immigrant families, life was anything but easy. Among them were the Italian-American community, who had arrived in significant numbers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These immigrants, many of whom came from Sicily, sought the promise of a better life but were met with challenges. They faced prejudice, discrimination, and a sense of isolation in a city still navigating its own social divides. Italian immigrants often worked as grocers, a role that placed them at the heart of their neighborhoods but also made them vulnerable. Their shops were more than just businesses. They were homes, places where families worked, lived, and tried to build a future. These were small, humble operations, and the people running them were no strangers to hard work. They woke before dawn, worked long hours, and did everything they could to provide for their families. But despite their efforts, they were often viewed as outsiders, their accents and customs marking them as different in a city that prided itself on its own unique identity. This backdrop of cultural vibrancy mixed with social tension created an atmosphere ripe for unease. The city, while outwardly thriving, had its share of challenges. Crime was a constant issue, and New Orleans' police force was notoriously understaffed and under-equipped. The city's dark alleys and quiet streets at night could be places of both romance and danger. For the Italian grocers, in particular, there was an underlying fear of being targeted, whether by petty thieves, extortionists, or, as it turned out, something far more sinister. It was against this complex backdrop that, in the spring of 1918, a new and terrifying threat emerged. A string of brutal attacks began to unfold, plunging the city into a state of fear and suspicion. The victims were almost always grocers, and many of them were Italian immigrants or their families. What started as isolated incidents quickly became a pattern, and the sheer brutality of the attacks shocked even the most seasoned detectives. For the people of New Orleans, the Axeman's crimes turned everyday life into a waking nightmare. Doors that were once left unlocked at night were now bolted shut. Families began to sleep in shifts, with one person always staying awake to keep watch. The vibrant music that once filled the air was replaced with an eerie silence, as neighbors whispered of the horrors happening in their own backyards. The Axeman's reign of terror didn't just steal lives, it robbed the city of its sense of safety and community. What made the crimes even more disturbing was the complete lack of explanation. Why grocers? Why Italian families? Why such violent personal attacks? There was no clear motive, no pattern that could be easily understood. The randomness of the killings left everyone vulnerable, and the lack of answers left an entire city paralyzed with fear. New Orleans, a city once defined by its resilience and joy, found itself in the grip of an invisible menace. The laughter and music that had been its heartbeat were now silenced by dread. As the Axeman's spree continued, the question on everyone's lips was the same: who would be next? And how could they protect themselves from a killer who seemed to strike without warning or reason? The Axeman's horrifying reign of terror began on May 23, 1918, with a crime so brutal it shocked even seasoned detectives. Joseph and Catherine Maggio, a married couple who owned a small grocery store, were found dead in their apartment above the shop. Like many grocers in New Orleans at the time, they lived where they worked, blending their business and personal lives into one space. But on that fateful night, their home became the site of a gruesome double murder. The killer struck while they slept. Joseph's throat was slashed so deeply with a straight razor that he was nearly decapitated. Catherine, who had likely woken during the attack, suffered a fatal skull fracture from repeated blows with an axe. The scene was horrifying. Blood soaked the bed, the walls, and the floor, a gruesome testament to the violence that had taken place. The murder weapons, the razor, and the axe were both left at the scene, as if the killer wanted to taunt the police. Investigators noted something strange. The back door had been tampered with. A panel had been carefully chiseled out, allowing the killer to reach in and unlock it. This meticulous method of entry would become a hallmark of the Axeman's crimes. Yet, despite this deliberate act, no fingerprints or footprints were found. Even more perplexing was the lack of motive. Nothing of value was stolen, and the couple appeared to have no known enemies. The randomness of the crime left police baffled and the public terrified. As weeks turned into months, the terror escalated. On June 27, 1918, another attack rocked the city. Louis Bezumer, a grocer, and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were discovered in their shared living quarters, both suffering from horrific axe wounds. Louis survived, though he was severely injured. Harriet initially survived the attack, but later died after complications from surgery. Her death brought even more chaos when Louis was falsely accused of being the attacker. Harriet had reportedly accused him before her passing, but no evidence supported the claim. The accusations only added confusion to an already bewildering case, leaving authorities struggling to piece together the truth. The Axeman struck again just a few months later, this time targeting 80-year-old Joseph Romano. On August 10, 1918, Romano was discovered by his nieces who lived with him. The elderly grocer had been attacked in his sleep, his skull fractured by axe blows. Though still alive when his nieces found him, he succumbed to his injuries shortly after. Witnesses reported seeing a shadowy figure fleeing the scene, described as a tall, dark man, but the descriptions were vague and inconsistent. The lack of a clear suspect fueled rumors and paranoia, with some suggesting the killer was a vengeful spirit or a supernatural being. One of the most devastating attacks came on March 10, 1919, when Charles and Rosie Cortimiglia were targeted in their home in the small town of Gretna, just across the river from New Orleans. The Cortimiglias were grocers, and like others before them, they were attacked while they slept. Rosie was found clutching her lifeless 2-year-old daughter, Mary, who had been killed instantly by a single blow to the head. Both Charles and Rosie survived their injuries, but their lives were forever shattered. The loss of their child was unbearable, and the trauma of the attack left scars far deeper than the physical wounds. What made these crimes so terrifying was the apparent randomness. The Axeman didn't seem to care about wealth, status, or personal grievances. He left no clear motive, no pattern beyond his preference for grocers, and no consistent victim profile. Sometimes he killed entire families. Other times, he spared victims who could recount their terrifying experiences. It was as if the Axeman wanted to sow chaos and fear. Thriving on the panic he left in his wake. The police were at a loss. The city's resources were limited, and forensic science was in its infancy, with no fingerprints, witnesses, or physical evidence tying anyone to the crimes. They had little to go on. The Axeman's ability to strike without warning and vanish without a trace added to his legend. For the residents of New Orleans, the fear was palpable. Homes that had once been welcoming now felt like prisons, fortified with locks and barricades in a desperate attempt to keep the killer out. Families took turns staying awake at night, listening for any sign of intrusion. The randomness and brutality of the Axeman's attacks only deepened the mystery. Why grocers? Why this specific community? And why was a child, an innocent 2-year-old, murdered while others were left alive? These questions haunted the people of New Orleans, and they would only grow more troubling as the Axeman's spree continued. As if the gruesome murders weren't enough to terrify the residents of New Orleans, the Axeman escalated his campaign of fear to an entirely new level in March of 1919. The city was already gripped by panic, but on March 13th, the Times-Picayune newspaper published a letter that would send shockwaves through the community. Allegedly written by the Axeman himself, the letter was addressed to the people of New Orleans and carried a tone so chilling, so bizarre, that it became one of the most infamous documents in true crime history. The letter began with the Axeman mocking the police, taunting their inability to catch him. He wrote with an unsettling confidence, declaring himself untouchable. But it was his self-description that truly unnerved readers. He referred to himself as a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell, a claim that played into the city's superstitious fears. New Orleans, with its rich history of voodoo, folklore, and spirituality, was no stranger to tales of the supernatural. The idea that the Axeman might be more than just a man, that he could be a demon or spirit, sent shivers through the city. The letter only grew more alarming as it continued. In a shocking declaration, the Axeman announced that he would strike again, setting the date for the night of March 19th. But there was a twist, and it was this twist that transformed the letter into something legendary. The Axeman claimed he had a peculiar condition for his next attack. Any house where jazz music was being played would be spared. He wrote, "I am fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing." The implications of this statement were as bizarre as they were horrifying. Was the Axeman truly enamored with jazz, or was this some kind of twisted joke? Did his love of music stem from his identity as a New Orleanian, or was this just another way to toy with the city? Whatever his intentions, the message was clear: play jazz, and you may live. The reaction was immediate and frantic. The city descended into a strange kind of chaos. Families scrambled to hire musicians, paying exorbitant sums to ensure their homes would echo with the sound of jazz on the appointed night. Jazz clubs, sensing both opportunity and obligation, stayed open late, hosting packed crowds of anxious patrons. Bands played relentlessly, some offering to perform at private homes for those too scared to venture outside. Even amateur musicians joined in, pulling out instruments or cranking up phonographs to fill their homes with music. By the night of March 19th, New Orleans had transformed into an impromptu festival of survival. The streets were alive with the sound of horns, pianos, and tambourines. Jazz music spilled from open windows, filling neighborhoods with a symphony of desperation and defiance. In a strange, almost surreal way, the Axeman's horrifying ultimatum had turned the city into one massive concert. Families who normally feared the dark found solace in the communal act of making noise, drowning out their fear with the sounds of jazz. When morning came, the city exhaled in collective relief. No murders had occurred that night. The Axeman, true to his word, had not struck. But this eerie night of jazz left New Orleans with more questions than answers. Who was this killer who demanded music as a condition for sparing lives? Was his demand genuine, or was it simply another way to instill terror? Was he truly a supernatural force, as his letter claimed, or just a deranged individual reveling in the power he held over an entire city? The letter cemented the Axeman's place in history, not just as a killer, but as a figure of dark legend. It blurred the lines between man and myth, feeding into the city's rich tapestry of ghost stories and folklore. Though he vanished after March 19th, his chilling words lingered, leaving an indelible mark on the psyche of New Orleans. The unanswered questions about his identity and motives ensured that the Axeman would remain one of the most haunting mysteries in American true crime. Over a century has passed since the Axeman's reign of terror, yet his identity and motives remain shrouded in mystery. The case has captivated true crime enthusiasts, historians, and folklorists alike, sparking endless debate about who or what the Axeman truly was. While many theories have been proposed, none have ever been proven, leaving the case as one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. One prominent theory links the Axeman's crimes to organized crime, particularly the Sicilian Mafia. The victims' connection to the Italian-American community, especially their roles as grocers, suggests a possible motive tied to extortion. At the time, Italian immigrants in New Orleans were often targeted by mafia groups demanding protection money. Those who refused to comply sometimes faced violent retaliation. Some speculate that the Axeman's attacks were orchestrated as brutal warnings to those who didn't pay up. However, this theory has significant flaws. The sheer brutality and apparent randomness of the murders, especially the killing of a child and the sparing of certain victims, don't align with the calculated methods typically associated with organized crime. Mafia killings, while violent, were rarely so public or erratic. Another compelling theory suggests the Axeman was a lone, deranged killer with no direct connection to his victims. This hypothesis focuses on the psychological profile of a spree killer, someone motivated by deep-seated rage or madness, who strikes without a clear pattern. The Axeman's inconsistent behavior, sparing some victims while mercilessly murdering others, supports this idea. Additionally, his ability to evade capture, his methodical approach to breaking into homes, and his choice of weapons suggest a chilling level of intelligence and premeditation. Yet, even this theory leaves many unanswered questions. Why grocers, specifically? Why did the murders suddenly stop? And what motivated his bizarre letter demanding jazz music? The most chilling theory comes directly from the Axeman himself. In his infamous letter, he described himself as a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell, claiming supernatural origins. While most dismissed this as a terrifying psychological ploy to further unnerve the city, some in New Orleans believed it. The city's unique culture, steeped in spiritualism, voodoo, and tales of the supernatural, provided fertile ground for such fears for those inclined to believe in the paranormal. The Axeman's ability to strike without being seen, his disappearance after March 19th, and his cryptic letter all pointed to something otherworldly. Was he a demon, as he claimed, a restless spirit seeking vengeance, or simply a man who understood how to exploit the city's deepest fears? Adding to the mystery is the fact that the Axeman seemed to vanish as suddenly as he appeared. After the night of March 19th, 1919, the night his letter promised death to all who didn't play jazz, no further attacks were definitively linked to him. Did he die, flee the city, or simply stop killing? If he was indeed human, why did he abandon his spree without warning? If he was something more, as some believed, did he complete whatever dark purpose had brought him to New Orleans? Even today, the Axeman story continues to haunt the city. It's more than just a historical true crime case. It has become a local legend, a tale passed down through generations. Some New Orleanians still whisper about the Axeman, wondering if his spirit lingers in the city's shadowy corners. His crimes have been immortalized in books, television, and even music, ensuring his dark legacy endures. The unanswered questions and the terrifying possibilities they raise are what keep this case alive in the public imagination. Was the Axeman a mafioso, a madman, or a monster? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain: his reign of terror left an indelible mark on New Orleans, a city forever changed by the shadow of his axe. So now, we turn to you. What do you think? Was the Axeman a flesh and blood murderer, a tool of organized crime, or something far more sinister? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you found this story as chilling as we did, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the unexplained. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another journey into the dark and mysterious corners of history.